Every time you read a single line of text, your brain is activating neural pathways that took thousands of years to develop. It may sound unbelievable, but the truth is that the human brain was never naturally designed for reading. We are born with eyes to see, ears to hear, and voices to communicate. But reading is something entirely different. It is not as natural as most people assume. For most of human evolutionary history, people never needed written language in order to survive. Writing itself has only existed for a few thousand years, far too short for the brain to evolve a dedicated reading center of its own. That is why every time you read, the brain has to connect multiple systems at once. Vision to recognize symbols, language to understand meaning, memory to connect information, and attention to maintain focus. In other words, reading is actually a process of the brain rewiring itself in real time. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that every book you read does not only change what you know, it quietly changes the way your brain itself works. The most remarkable thing about reading is not the words printed on the page, but the way your brain responds to them. Every time you read, billions of neural connections inside your brain are working together to transform meaningless symbols into images, sounds, and emotions that carry meaning. Your brain must constantly coordinate vision, language, memory, imagination, and analytical thinking all at the same time. That is why reading is far from a passive activity. In many ways, it is one of the most complex workouts the brain can experience. Scientists have even discovered that long-term reading can physically change the structure of the brain, strengthen neural connections, and improve focus and concentration. And the deeper you read, the more your brain learns how to think deeply as well. Perhaps that is why people who read often tend to analyze situations better, remain calmer under pressure, and understand the world in a more profound way than others. Because sometimes, a book does not simply give you more knowledge, it slowly transforms you into a different version of yourself. Thousands of years ago, human beings had never heard of books, alphabets, or written text as we know them today. The earliest civilizations, such as the Sumerians and Egyptians, began with simple symbols carved into stone and clay. But over time, those symbols slowly evolved into writing systems, and eventually into languages that allowed people to preserve knowledge, record history, and pass ideas down through generations. What is truly fascinating is that as writing evolved, the human brain evolved with it. The more people read and wrote, the more they developed the ability to think abstractly, imagine new possibilities, and analyze the world more deeply. In many ways, books did not just preserve civilization, they helped create modern civilization itself. And perhaps the reason reading holds such incredible power is because every page you read connects you to thousands of years of human wisdom and thought. What do you think about that? Let me know in the comments below. Many people assume that reading is simply about looking at words and understanding their meaning. But in reality, every time you read, almost your entire brain is working at once. The visual processing regions help you recognize letters and symbols. The language centers decode the meaning of words and sentences. Memory systems connect new information with past experiences. At the same time, the emotional regions allow you to feel the atmosphere, the pain, or the joy within a story. That is why a powerful book can make your heart race, keep your mind constantly engaged, and shift your emotions as if you were truly living inside that world yourself. Scientists often describe this as a whole brain process, an activity that engages nearly the entire brain simultaneously. And perhaps that is also why deep reading does not simply make you more knowledgeable. It trains your brain to focus better, think more deeply, and experience life with a far greater level of emotional awareness and understanding. What makes this even more fascinating is that the brain does not process every language in the same way. For example, English uses an alphabet system where each letter represents a sound. Chinese, on the other hand, uses a logographic writing system where each character carries its own visual form and meaning. Because of this, reading Chinese requires the brain to rely much more heavily on visual processing and image-based memory. Scientists once studied a bilingual patient who could read both English and Chinese after suffering a stroke. Remarkably, he lost the ability to read Chinese while still being able to read English normally. This revealed that different languages activate different neural networks inside the brain. In other words, the language you read does not only influence the way you communicate, it quietly shapes the way your brain thinks, remembers information, and interprets the world around you. Have you ever read a book and felt heartbroken for a character, as if the story were happening to you personally? That is not a coincidence. When we read deeply, the brain does not simply process information, it also simulates the emotions and experiences of other people within our minds. Scientists have discovered that the brain regions associated with pain, empathy, and emotion become active when we read about a character's emotional experiences. That is why a novel can make you cry, feel anxious, or even feel emotionally healed. Books allow us to live many different lives without ever leaving our seat. And perhaps one of the greatest powers of reading is that it makes people more empathetic, more emotionally aware, and more capable of understanding one another in a world that often feels increasingly cold and rushed. Perhaps the biggest problem of the modern age is not that people read too little, but that they no longer read deeply. When reading on our phones, our attention is constantly being pulled away by notifications, short videos, messages, and endless streams of new content appearing every single day. Over time, the brain becomes accustomed to scrolling quickly, consuming information rapidly, and losing patience with anything that requires more than a few seconds of focused thought. That is why so many people now struggle to concentrate on a long book, even if they used to do it effortlessly in the past. Scientists believe that when we become used to shallow reading and constant skimming, the brain gradually loses some of its ability to think critically and analyze information deeply. It also becomes easier for people to be influenced by misinformation and emotionally manipulative content. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that this change happens quietly, little by little, every day. Do you feel like your ability to focus has decreased because of phones and social media? Leave a comment below, and do not forget to like the video if you are also trying to regain your focus and attention. One of the most concerning issues today is that children's brains are growing up in an environment of constant stimulation from screens. Many studies suggest that children who are exposed to smartphones and digital devices too early often struggle later with attention, memory, and learning abilities. When the brain becomes accustomed to the fast pace of short videos, endless notifications, and constantly changing content, children gradually lose patience for activities that require sustained focus, such as reading books or thinking deeply. That is why many children now feel bored after only a few minutes without a phone nearby. Their brains have become used to being continuously stimulated. And perhaps the most dangerous part is that this transformation happens so quietly that many people fail to realize an entire generation's ability to focus is slowly being worn away day by day. In a world where everything is competing for your attention every second, the ability to sit still and focus on reading a book has become incredibly rare. Many people constantly jump from one video to another, from one notification to the next, until the brain barely has any time left to think deeply anymore. But deep reading works in the exact opposite way. It forces the brain to slow down, sustain attention for longer periods, and connect information on a much deeper level. That is why people who maintain a reading habit often develop stronger critical thinking skills, better analytical abilities, and greater emotional control. In an age dominated by distraction and fast dopamine, reading may no longer be just a hobby. It is gradually becoming a kind of mental immunity that helps people protect their focus, depth of thought, and ultimately, their ability to stay in control of their own minds. Perhaps the most powerful thing about reading is not the amount of knowledge you remember, but the way it quietly transforms who you are over time. Every book leaves a mark on the brain, shaping the way you think, the way you see life, and even the way you understand the emotions of other people. Deep reading helps people remain calmer in the middle of chaos, more focused in a world filled with endless distractions, and more capable of independent thought in an age overwhelmed by information. And perhaps one book at the right moment in your life can completely change the direction of your future. In a world that constantly pushes us to think faster and more superficially, the ability to read deeply may be one of the few things that still preserves human clarity, awareness, and depth of thought. If you enjoy content about psychology, the brain, and personal growth, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for the next videos ahead.